Welcome to The Explainer. We usually think of legendary filmmakers as having everything perfectly figured out from day one. But actually, genius is often forged in the fires of absolute chaos and failure. Today, we are diving deep into Alfred Hitchcock's daring and, frankly, somewhat reckless late 1940s technical experiments. We're going to see exactly how his absolute biggest production hurdles, the ones that caused him the absolute worst headaches, actually birthed his ultimate, unbreakable cinematic rules.
So what exactly happens when the master of suspense makes a mistake? Well, to find out, we're going to pull back the curtain on three legendary films: Rope, Under Capricorn, and Stage Fright. Now, on the surface, these are classic pieces of cinema, but behind the scenes, they were grueling trials filled with staggering obstacles. And as you'll see, it was these very missteps that eventually taught Hitchcock his most profound and enduring lessons about movie making.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the 10-minute take. This is all about Hitchcock's infamous 1948 stunt film, Rope.
To really get the scale of this stunt, think about the number 1,360. Your average thriller from back in the day uses maybe 600 cuts, but a highly cut, intensely suspenseful film like Hitchcock's later masterpiece The Birds uses around 1,360 cuts to meticulously build that signature, terrifying suspense. Cutting is literally how a director controls what you see and what you feel.
But for Rope, the number Hitchcock wanted was 0. Yep, 0. The sheer audacity of this idea is just staggering. It was a $1.5 million production, told in continuous real time from 7:30 to 9:15 p.m., and the crazy idea was to shoot the entire film with absolutely 0 intended cuts. He wanted to use grueling 10-minute takes that ate up the entire physical roll of film in the camera magazine.
Now, obviously, a camera magazine only holds about 10 minutes of film. So how do you fix the massive snag of reloading without stopping the scene? You hide the cut. They would literally have a character walk right in front of the lens, blacking out the action for a split second. The crew would frantically swap to a second camera, ending one roll on the close-up of a dark jacket and starting the exact same close-up on the next reel.
Pulling off 10 uninterrupted minutes meant the set had to function like this insane, perfectly choreographed ballet. First, actors had to hit these tiny numbers mapped out all over the floor. Second, as the massive camera moved, furniture mounted on rollers was silently pushed out of the way. Third, the actual walls of the living room swung back on silent rails. And fourth, outside the window, stagehands were physically shifting spun glass clouds to simulate the passing of time. Imagine getting 8 flawless minutes into a take only to have the camera pan over and catch an electrician accidentally standing right in the shot, which, by the way, actually happened and completely ruined a perfect take.
But hey, camera movement wasn't the only massive headache. Let's move to Section 2, mastering color and sound and the totally new technical hurdles it brought.
So Rope was actually Hitchcock's very first color film, and it led to some absolute disasters. They literally had to reshoot the last 5 reels because the fake New York sunset looked completely luridly orange. It forced a massive paradigm shift in how he lit his sets. In the 1920s, black and white lighting used heavy backlights to detach actors from the background. But Hitchcock quickly discovered that applying that exact same technique to color film looked totally unnatural. He established a strict new mandate: hide the source of the studio lighting.
And he brought that exact same intense obsession with realism to the sound design. For a scene with an approaching police siren, the studio naturally offered him a standard pre-recorded track from their library. Hitchcock completely rejected it. To capture true acoustic distance, he ordered a real ambulance. They placed a microphone at the studio gate, sent the ambulance 2 miles down the road, and recorded it driving all the way back.
So, what did this all mean? Despite all these brilliant technical workarounds, Rope's exhausting physical demands led Hitchcock to a stark realization and a definitive cinematic law: films must be cut. He realized continuous shooting was basically a mistake. Visual narration absolutely requires montage. You have to vary the size and angle of the image to dictate emotional importance.
All right, moving on to our next major stumble. Section 3, the price of stardom. Let's talk about the 1949 financial disaster, Under Capricorn.
Hitchcock was totally intoxicated by the prestige of casting America's absolute biggest star at the time, Ingrid Bergman. But this blind spot led to a cascade of $2.5 million mistakes. First off, star salaries ballooned the budget so high it couldn't possibly be profitable. Second, he horribly miscast the male lead. Third, audiences expected a thriller, but reviewers noted you had to wait 105 minutes for the first actual thrill. And finally, the writer he hired literally couldn't write endings. For a massive relationship-shattering marital quarrel, the writer's only solution was to have the characters just look at each other and say, "I'm sorry, it was a mistake." The tension behind the camera was honestly just as bad. Hitchcock tried using those long, fluid takes from Rope again, and it drove Bergman absolutely crazy. She hated how large pieces of the set would just vanish into thin air while she was acting. One evening, she threw a massive fit about it. Hitchcock simply turned around, silently walked out, and went home. Someone called him later to say Bergman hadn't even noticed he left and was still complaining to an empty room 20 minutes later.
Out of all this commercial failure and creative confusion, Hitchcock synthesized another unbreakable rule: the run-for-cover mandate. He realized that whenever a filmmaker enters an area of doubt, you must run for cover. Like an explorer lost in the woods, you don't take a shortcut. You retrace your steps back to your starting point, back to the tested elements you are completely sure of.
This brings us right to 1950. Section 4. The Lying Flashback, which was Stage Fright's most severe narrative miscalculation. In Stage Fright, Hitchcock made a really controversial choice. He showed a visual flashback of a character's totally full story. And he learned the hard way that while audiences will perfectly accept a verbal lie, they will absolutely never forgive a visual flashback lie. Why? Because cinema relies on an unwritten visual contract. If the camera shows it to us, we believe it's subjective reality. Breaking that trust severely alienates the viewer.
And this brilliantly illustrates another wild issue on the set: ego completely destroying character logic. Actress Jane Wyman was supposed to be playing a character in an incredibly plain, unattractive disguise, but she had to share the screen with the intensely glamorous Marlene Dietrich. Every time Wyman saw the daily footage, she'd literally burst into tears. So, secretly, day by day, Wyman kept improving her makeup and sneaking on more glamour, completely ruining her character's essential disguise.
But frankly, the line flashback and the makeup drama weren't even the biggest issues here. Let's look at Section 5, the Golden Villain Rule.
So the crucial point is this: the ultimate reason Stage Fright failed to generate suspense was because the villains themselves were cowardly and afraid. Villains in fear equals no real danger for the hero. If the bad guy is scared and running away, the protagonist is never actually threatened. The journey loses all of its stakes, the tension evaporates, and the audience simply stops caring.
From that specific failure, Hitchcock cemented what is arguably his greatest cinematic epiphany. It's an unbreakable cardinal rule: the more successful the villain, the more successful the picture. Think about the terrifying charm of his best villains in films like Notorious or Shadow of a Doubt. A formidable, intelligent, unstoppable threat elevates the hero and elevates the entire film. So, from the exhausting 10-minute takes of Rope to the weak villains of Stage Fright, we've seen exactly how the master's greatest production hurdles birth his ultimate cinematic rules. So I leave you with this question: which of Hitchcock's hard-earned cinematic rules will you spot the next time you sit down to watch a thriller? Will you notice a perfectly hidden cut, or evaluate the true strength of the villain? Keep these behind-the-scenes masterclass secrets in mind, and you'll seriously never watch movies the same way again. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep learning.